Welcome to another episode of Voices. I'm your host, Keston Jones. Visionaries offering information with clarity, expertise, and substance. We are content experts. Let your voice be heard. Welcome to another episode of Voices. I'm your host, Keston Jones. And today we have another special guest, Mr. Patrice McLeod.
Hi, pleased to meet you.
Mr. McLeod is one of New York's bravest, a New York City firefighter. And, you know, like I said, we have a number of people on the show who speak about, you know, the work that they do as it relates to being a counselor, being an advocate. And I think that there's no other word or none other better to describe being an advocate, being brave than New York City firefighters.
Thank you.
So I thought it would be a great idea for Patrice to come on the show. I've known him for quite a while now. And I wanted to share his story. And, you know, even as a New York City firefighter, as a person of color, it's important for us to be represented in many ways. And I think it's time for Mr. Patrice McLeod's voice to be elevated. So Thank you for agreeing to be on the show today.
Thank you, Keston. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
So, you know, tell us about yourself. I gave a little bit about the fact that you're a New York City firefighter, and we'll talk about that further. But tell us about yourself, your upbringing, you know, where you're from, and some memories that you have of, you know, being a child in New York City.
Well, my mom, I'm first generation American for my family. My mom is from Trinidad, and my dad was born in Aruba, but he grew up in an island called Carriacou, Grenada at the age of 7. My mom migrated to this country when she was 24 years old. My dad came here when he was 18. Reason being, my grandfather, he had diabetes, and those societies in those third world countries very patriarchal, and my grandfather was the primary breadwinner. When he became ill with diabetes and they had to amputate one of his legs, my dad, being the oldest boy, had to assume that responsibility. So he migrated here. But growing up in, I grew up born and raised in Brooklyn, Kings County Hospital. That's where I was born and raised.
Shout out to Brooklyn.
Yeah, so, and primarily my mom raised me. I mean, I would see my dad on and off throughout my upbringing and stuff. But growing up, like I said, a typical West Indian household where, you know, education was heavily promoted, hard work was heavily promoted, and, you know, discipline, you know, respect for your elders, that kind of thing was very enforced. I grew up primarily in the Flatbush area, and you know, grew up, went to Erasmus Hall High School, graduated from there.
I mean, Erasmus is cool. I went to Boys and Girls High School. So Erasmus,
you know, a little rivalry, right? Our football team is finally good, right? So, yeah, I did that, and then went on to college. I finally graduated at LIU, Brooklyn campus. And then I was always one of those type of kids who I didn't know, I wanted to do everything, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So, how I became a firefighter.
Yes. Please tell us about that. You know, and you're a New York City product. I'm a product of New York City high schools, LIU, and now you're a part of New York City's bravest. And you know, I like to applaud you for the work that you do.
Thank you.
But when did you, you know, first become interested in being a New York City firefighter? Like, what was that like?
Well, I remember in high school they had a recruiter come by, and they used to have a recruiter from the police department and then the fire department. And I was getting ready to go to college and stuff. So being part of a West Indian household, they always tell you, you know, keep your options open. So when they said that the test was coming around, I said, you know, at the time I was thinking, I don't know if this is something I really want to do, but you know what, I'm going to take the test anyway. And if I do get called, at least I'll have the option to say yes or no. So I took the test, went away to school, literally forgot about the test. I was at school, they called me for the physical. I wasn't able to make it down, so didn't get on that list. They gave the test again 4 years later, took it again, was able to take the physical, passed it, and then forgot about the test. 4 years later, unfortunately 9/11 happened. The department suffered a lot of losses, and then they got up to my list number. So I literally remember the day, I'm coming home from work, I opened the mailbox, I see a letter from the city of New York Fire Department. So I'm like, why are they writing me?
Yeah.
And then I open up the letter and they say, oh, we got up to your list number if you're still interested in being a firefighter. You know, call us to set you your appointment, and then the rest it worked out kind of seamlessly.
It's amazing you say that because you know, I worked, you know, for the Department of Health, and you know, oftentimes in order to work for the city, you have to take these tests. And I tell some of the young men that I work with, even some of the older men, that take the exams.
Yes.
You know, these exams come out periodically. Whenever I see exams, like right now, you know, the sanitation exam is coming out, and I'm telling my guys, please take the exam. Sometimes we forget about it, and years go by, like such in your case, and then eventually, you know, a city job, having benefits, and all the things that comes with being a city worker is very, very, you know, beneficial.
Yeah.
You know, New York City firefighters and firefighters the world round, you know, are some of the bravest individuals, hence New York City's bravest. And especially in the news as of late, there's the California wildfires that happened, but you mentioned 9/11, and it hit home. As someone who's from New York, it hit home. And tell us about that particular period. You know, as a result of that period, you were called and you became a firefighter. But what would you say to those, you know, who's listening, even around the world, about, you know, the bravery of New York City firefighters?
I would just say that I think firefighting is a unique job in the sense that I look at it more as a vocation or a calling. Same thing with police and what you do in the social services and stuff. You know, you have to really have a desire to want to help others, and it calls on a certain amount of selflessness. That was the thing that attracted me to the job. Like when I was considering taking the exam, I thought to myself, I said, well, you know what? You need to have a mental aptitude to do it, which I believe I have. You need to have the physical ability to do it, which I believe that I have. And you have to have the desire to want to help others. And the question I asked myself was, if I was in a burning building or in a situation that I couldn't get myself or help myself out of, I would want somebody to help me. So that's how I looked at it when I took the test. I want to be able to help somebody. Because I would want, if I was in their situation, I would want somebody to help me, and that's how I kind of looked at the job. So what I would tell, you know, like when 9/11 hit, like I said, I got on the job 2 years after that. And I remember I was working at LaGuardia as a college advisor. I remember hearing the reports on my way to work, and I really couldn't process it. I thought the news reports were mistaken. You know, I thought it, you know, because it just, I was like, a plane flying to a building.
Movie.
Yeah, exactly. And I just was like, that doesn't make sense to me. And where LaGuardia is in Long Island City, you saw a view of the towers on smoke. And I'm seeing it, and I'm seeing all the chaos happening, all the people frantic, but I still couldn't process it. You know, it was literally maybe 2 weeks later when I was in a car with a friend, and we passed Ground Zero from the West Side Highway, and I saw it. It looked like that opening scene in Terminator. And that's when it really hit me, like, wow, this really happened, you know. And I remember being downtown, smelling that smell, and that's when it really occurred to me. But it didn't, despite that happening here in New York City, it didn't deter me from wanting to become a firefighter. I think in some ways it kind of motivated me a little bit more.
I mean, and that's why, you know, in terms of yourself, you have what it takes. You know, firefighters are those that everyone else is running from the situation, and you're saying, I'm going to run into this burning building. So my hats go out to you, the entire New York City Fire Department, and also in thinking about 9/11. You know, my heart goes out to the families that lost so many lives on that day. What would you say to someone who is, you know, wanting to pursue being a firefighter? Like, you know, what advice would you give to a young person who wants to become a firefighter, especially for yourself as a person of color?
I would say if they have a desire to help others, if they, you know, they're physically fit, they, you know, obviously a mental aptitude to do the job, but if they have a desire to help and to service their community and stuff, I definitely would recommend that they take it and stuff. Especially nowadays, this is a great time to get onto the department. You know, they're trying to diversify the ranks. You know, I've been a firefighter now for 15 years.
Yeah.
And I still have people approach me and say, "Wow, I've never seen a black firefighter before." You know, and it
Yeah.
makes me feel happy to hear that to a certain degree, but it also makes me think that, you know what, that's a very powerful image
Yeah.
when they see a person of color in that uniform, because it lets them know that, you know what, I could do it too. You know, so use me as an example. I've been doing it for 15 years. I currently teach at the academy, where, again, the department has done a lot of efforts to diversify the ranks. Matter of fact, last class that just graduated, we had the most females ever, which was 15
Yes.
that graduated. And, you know, I remember when I came on the job, it was less than 2% minorities on the job, maybe 1.3%.
Yeah.
And now I think the numbers are a little bit around maybe 4 or 5%. So they're
Yeah.
growing slowly but surely. But I definitely would say, you know what, it's a great job. And the thing with city jobs, as you know as well, is that, you know, you have great benefits. You have a pension that you could look forward to, so you don't have to be working until you're 70, 80 years old. You have something that
and also job security.
And job security. Yeah, you're not going to get laid off like in corporate America. You know, it's not cutthroat like that. You know, it's a whole different animal and stuff. So I definitely would recommend the young people out there, if they have that desire to help others and to be in the community, to come take the exam.
Well, definitely, man. We appreciate you sharing your voice and also elevating the voices of those who are New York City firefighters. And, you know, for the young kids out there, for you to see, you know, an example of someone who looks like you and is not doing, you know, quote unquote, the negative things that we see in the media, but it's also doing something positive.
Thanks.
And I'm sure that over the course of 15 years, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of families that you have directly affected with your efforts in saving tremendous lives. I know you got stories for days.
I hope so. Yeah. I hope I-
But let's talk about, in terms of stories, let's talk about how you and I first met.
Okay.
You and I first met with your involvement as one of the stars, might I add, and you definitely shined through in this documentary by Miss Daphne McWilliams. In a Perfect World. Shout out to Daphne McWilliams
Daphne,
for
hi.
allowing me to be a part of you know, that particular process, you know, in terms of evaluating and screening for my fatherhood group. So they got a chance to see a rough cut early of the film, and we definitely talked about how engaging the film was. And the film In a Perfect World is about essentially single parent households and mothers and women raising sons, and what happened as a result of that. How are these sons faring years later? And your story stood out, you know, in terms of you know how you felt about, you know, your upbringing and things like that. What would you say about that process? Can you share a little bit about, you know, that filming and what it looked like?
Well, like I said earlier, I was primarily raised by my mom, and I mean, we'll go into this later. I wrote a letter, but I just remember as a kid, like my dad was like bigger than life to me, you know. And I remember seeing him very consistently, and then all of a sudden that kind of got interrupted. I think part of the reason was that he had got remarried, and you know, there was maybe more demands on his time. But you know, there was times where he would call and say he would come and get me for the weekend. We would spend time, and I would look forward to these times, you know, have my bags packed, waiting, and then just never show up, you know. I would call, I would, you know, phone would ring constantly sometimes. Sometimes I would get his wife. She said, oh, he just stepped out. I didn't hear from him to know when he's going to be back. And then, you know, and half an hour turned into an hour turned into midnight turned into the next day day turned into a week. And, you know, it really affected me, where I would be, you know, I'd be in tears, you know. And but thinking back about those times, I guess the way it really affected me was, and this is something that I learned as I got older and I started to seek help for some of the things that resulted from that relationship with my dad. I realized that his not being consistent or his being absent, it fostered a lot of feelings of disappointment, abandonment, rejection, and anger, you know. And it kind of those feelings kind of manifested themselves, believe it or not, with my relationships with women. Like,
Yeah.
I've always noticed that the women that I really cared about or that I really liked, they shared similar traits to my dad. And those traits were, you know, good looking, charming, engaging, but very selfish, very transient. And I would find myself in this role being that kid trying to be as good as I could be, you know, because I'm thinking, well, the better that I am, he'll want to come. The better that I am, they'll want to be with me. But that would never be the case, you know. It would never work out that way. So a lot of frustration and stuff. So I needed some kind of avenue, some kind of outlet. So my mom had suggested there was a priest from Trinidad, matter of fact. He was finishing his final studies to become a ordained Catholic priest, and he was doing a project that dealt with spiritual direction. And I went to see him, and he was telling me, you know, he said spiritual direction, you're kind of seeing where God is working in your life, where he's been, where he is. And he said in this journey, you're going to be forced to deal with issues that might not be uncomfortable. You know, but the analogy he used with me is like, you know, if you're a kid running and you fall down and you scrape your knee, you get like a burn on your knee. It hurts initially, right? But then it forms a scab, and then that scab falls off. You still have the mark, but there's no pain anymore. But he says you have to have the courage to keep working through that and stuff. And at that time, I was in my early 20s, and I was willing to try anything. So that was the first step in my process of trying to heal the issues that I had, the feelings that I had from my relationship with my dad, or lack thereof. And then that transitioned into going to seeing a counselor, which I still do see today. And those helped me realize like a lot of behaviors. Like what I noticed with my relationships with women, I wasn't even present to that until I started going to counseling and speaking to somebody, because I started realizing my reaction. And, you know, she pointed it out to me, and I said, you know, it makes sense. That's why I was always acting like that. Anytime I felt like I was going to be rejected, or my affection wasn't going to be returned to me, I would get defensive, you know, because it just brought me back to that kid waiting for his dad to come who wouldn't come. And it just hurt too much.
You know what? I'd like to thank you for sharing, and you know, I use the word brave again, because oftentimes, especially amongst men, it's machismo, and we don't want to talk about these issues. And you know, we often hear what happens as a result of a father not being there or a father being there. But obviously, this is something that to this day, you know, you feel very strongly about.
Yes.
And I'm glad that, you know, you did seek someone who you can, you know, process this with. And oftentimes, some of us, we don't process it. We're just, you know, we just deal with these issues and go from one relationship to the next relationship and not really understand what is the barrier that's keeping us from being whole in these relationships.
Yes.
And I think despite the fact that someone wasn't there as much as you would like, someone was there. Your mother was there.
Yes.
You know, your mother was there. And you know, let's talk about, like, how do you feel about her presence in your life? And, you know, just for the women who are there in spite of men not being there, what would you have to say to the single mothers who are forced to raise children on their own?
Well, I'll go with my mom first. I'm a very faithful and prayerful man, and every time I pray, I thank God for my mom. She's the greatest gift He's given me. She is the greatest extension of His love to me in this world. So I thank Him for that. One of the biggest things that I'm very thankful for my mom for, a tremendous amount of gratitude I have for her, is that she never misspoke about my dad. She never bad talked him. She never said, your father's this, your father's that. She let me see for myself. If I would ask questions about my dad, she didn't lie to me either. But I remember growing up as a kid saying, you know what, Mom, I wish he wasn't my dad. I don't want to talk to him anymore. I don't want to deal with him. And she would always say, but he's your father. He's your father. I remember I had seriously considered changing my last name. And she told me, nope, it's still your father. You know, she's like, keep your name. You know who brought you into the world, who's responsible for you in the world. So I have a lot of gratitude for her with that. As far as other single moms out there, I would want to say to them that you shouldn't have to be a single mom. You know, nobody should have to raise a child on their own. But for those of you that are doing that, I want to commend you for it. I want a tremendous amount of gratitude. And even though there's times you're angry with the man who brought this child into the world with you, try your best not to transfer that anger to the child, because at the end of the day, that child deserves to have the best opportunity they have to be as healthy as they could be, emotionally, physically, spiritually, everything.
Yeah.
And your love and your presence being there for them is more than enough. They will grow up and make their own decisions and see for themselves how their father was. You don't have to add to that, or you don't have to dictate anything. Kids are very smart, they're very aware, they know. And you know, even if, you know, I think the most important thing is, like my mom, you know, you have to put the child first. Even if it's the hardest thing to do, to get along with the father, think about it. You're not doing it for the father's sake, you're doing it for your child's sake. You know, so that I would just tell them to be patient, to be resilient, to keep persevering, to keep loving, because my mom, I think one of the greatest gifts my mom gave me was she has fostered a great capacity in me to love and to be able to show love and to give love, you know, to receive it. On the flip side of that, you know, and this is only through a lot of work, a lot of self-reflection with spiritual direction, a lot of prayer, with my counseling and stuff. My dad also served a purpose, and the purpose he served was he showed me also how to love by what not to do. He showed me, you know, how example, you know, he showed me, you know, what not to do. So, you know, I'm at a point in my life where I thank God not only for the good things that happen to me, but for the bad things or the difficult things, because all these things shape us who we are. And, you know, I mean, I don't want to get overly religious or spiritual, but, you know, if you look at the story of Jesus, you know, he embraced his cross. And we all have crosses to bear, whatever that may be. But you have to embrace, you could choose to be burdened by your cross, or you could choose to embrace your cross and to conquer it. And I've chosen, by, you know, doing the spiritual direction, by going to counseling, by talking to people and sharing my story, to embrace my cross. And I look at it and I see so much beauty and so much love, and I think it's through those things I've been able to be compassionate and ultimately able to forgive my dad for what he was, for what he wasn't. You know? Yeah,
thank you for sharing it. You know, shout out to the single moms and the ones that are able to, you know, overcome whatever adversity or whatever problems or whatever concerns they may have had with the spouse and put the child first.
Yes.
And I think it's very important that we do that. And this is an issue that, you know, in doing the work and doing the research, you know, for my dissertation, I'm seeing that it's not just, you know, men that are going through, it's just women as well. You know, the lack of a father and feeling of you know, worthlessness and all these other things that you feel, you know, children somehow, what did I do? You know, why am I not deserving? Especially when as a kid you grow up, you know, in our era we saw like movies like Home Alone, and the kids were sliding down the banister and it's like, hey dad, you know, and you're like, you know, you see all these things, and then, you know, parent teacher night, and you know, you go to basketball games, so it affects a child tremendously. So, you know, thank you, and I see that you're doing great work. And you mentioned healing, and you mentioned what you needed to do in order to heal, and you mentioned, you know, counseling and these other areas. And you know, you shared with me that your father has since passed. What have you you done for yourself, you know, in terms of you know, that you have done to kind of like, you know, speak about this or address it? What are some of the things that you've done?
Well, like I said earlier, I did the spiritual direction, the counseling, which I still keep up with. A lot of prayer, a lot of tears. You know, and I believe that my mom always say crying is a form of healing. You know, and what I recently did was I went to my counselor and we were talking, and I'm a part of a group at church, which is it's called the Samuel Group, and it's about discerning and you know, see what God is playing in your life and stuff. And I just got the idea. I said, you know what? I wanted to write my dad a letter because I just wanted to speak to him, even though he's been passed almost 14 years now. I just wanted to talk to him man to man, face to face, and kind of outlay to him, you know, how I viewed our relationship from my perspective as the child growing into a man. and I thought about the arguments and the disagreements we had, and a lot of it was, as you could imagine, very emotionally charged, filled with a lot of anger and stuff. And I didn't want to come from that place. So I decided to write a letter to verbalize this, because I just figured, you know what, it's just another way of healing and another way of coming at peace with what had happened. And that was the letter.
Oh, damn. How does that feel? Like,
I mean, when I first wrote it, I mean, I was writing it in tears, and then when I read it the second time, and now I read it in front of my. The second time I read it in front of my therapist, and then this is like the third time I'm reading it, and I feel such a tremendous. My heart feels very light. I feel a tremendous amount of relief, and all the anger that I had for my dad and stuff like that, I don't really feel that anymore. I feel more empathetic towards him, a lot of compassion towards him. I feel a little bit of pity for him too. You know, my dad, he had a hard relationship with his father, my grandfather, and a lot of times we are a product of our upbringing, you know, and some of us have the strength to say, well, we're going to be different and we're going to do different, and we actually do it. And some people just follow the status quo because they just don't know anything.
Well, listen, well, you obviously have the strength.
Thanks.
You've obviously done different. You've obviously forged and created a great career for yourself. You're helping hundreds, and I'm sure many people truly value you and respect you. And for your dad, you mentioned that he may not have had the capacity, may not have been aware. Just know that you made a great thing, and I'm sure your mom's is very proud of you, man. You know, we're proud of you, New York City's bravest. Thank you for sharing, because that was deeply personal. But one of the things that I really stress on this show is for us to have the platform to elevate our voices. And I'm sure, you know, when individuals read or hear about this episode and then watch it, they will, you know, a lot of the things you will say will resonate.
I hope so.
Because I'm certainly, and this is not just for men, for women as well.
Yes.
So, you know, really appreciate you having the courage.
Thanks.
To really share, you know, your experience with your dad, and you know, I'm touched by it. I'm moved by it. And I'd like to thank you.
Thank you, Keston.
For being a part of this episode, being a part of Voices, really speaking about the wonderful work that you're doing in the community, the wonderful work as one of New York City's bravest, but also touching a very important issue in our community, and that's fatherlessness and what it does to our community and what it does to our population. And that's why I work so hard, tirelessly, to elevate the voices of fathers as well as mothers, as well as creating this the idea of an intact family. What does that look like for the importance of our children in the coming generation? So again, thank you for being a part of the show.
Thanks.
Thank you guys for listening. What's your thoughts on this subject? How do you feel about fatherhood in general and the importance of having fathers in the lives of their children, even if it's a father that may not be the best father that we may like? We only have one father. And, you know, so again, please tell us your thoughts. This has been another episode of Voices. I'm your host, Keston Jones, signing off. Peace.